Now, here's the interesting part, leveraging theta brainwave to start to reprogram your subconscious.
It's the new year. Alex can't wait to get started on his New Year's habits. He's full of energy and motivation to not make 2024 a waste. 1 week goes by and he's making good progress. 2 weeks go by and he's starting to feel a little different. 3 weeks go by and he relapses back into old habits. What went wrong?
So simply put, character recreation is one of the most painful processes that you will ever experience in your life. And many people, they don't have the strength, the mental capacity, and the consistency in order to kind of remap their psyche and therefore their reality. And that's the essence of what you're fundamentally doing here. Look, I know it's cliche. It's very cliche. Starting the new year, new me, new habits, new character, new destiny, new outcomes for me. The outcomes that I've always dreamed of, finally in this year, they all come to fruition, but they won't. They won't. And the reason why is because it's a painful process. It's a painful process. When you strip away different parts of yourself, there's a long period kind of maybe in between that past version of you and the new person of you where you're lost. And you might be lost for years. I remember when I came out of a mental health hospital in 2018, and I couldn't even wear the clothes that I'd been wearing before going into hospital because they made me feel ill and anxious. Like psychologically, I couldn't. It was like my personality fragmented, and I could just not associate. Clothes are a very interesting skin to wear in how you portray yourself to the rest of the world. And one of the reasons I ended up in that mental hospital is because I was living a character which wasn't conducive to my worldview. And when I got out of it, I had to throw it all away. I had to throw all 80 to 90% of my wardrobe I just threw away. And because again, it just felt like, acid and chemicals on my skin. It just didn't really coincide with who I wanted. I wore lots of piercings. I took my piercings out. I threw them away. I think I shaved my head as well. If you go back to some of my earlier videos, you can see this transition. But again, I had no idea who I was. And this is very relevant in making these long-term habits stick. And I believe I have a method which really helped me flesh out that particular process to a point where it wasn't so anxiety provoking, and you can find your path a little bit more smoothly. And the first one is this quote, which I believe is one of the best quotes I've ever heard. And for me, it rings so true. It's so powerful. I'm sure you would have heard it before. Lao Tzu, the father of Taoism, the yin yang, the Tao Te Ching. This is the individual who is, history tells us, religion tells us, is the impetus behind these particular fundamental, life-changing, paradigm-shifting teachings. So, what's your thoughts? What's your thoughts? Your thoughts become the words that come out your mouth. What's your words? They become your actions, habits, character, destiny. In essence, you can equate the experience that you have every single day as a consequence of the thoughts you're keeping inside of your mind, your internal dialogue. And it's like programming. How does one reprogram their thoughts is the question that you're going to be asking yourselves. And this is fundamentally what you're going to do if you're going to be able, to have those habits stick long term for you. So your present situation is simply a consequence of the thoughts that you think the most, reoccurring thoughts every single day. Trying to address the bad habit or action is therefore futile in comparison to the underlying programming. It's like if a train is on a track, right? You have different carriages on the train, right? You can change the carriages, right? You can change the front carriage, the middle carriage, and the end carriage. But if you don't change the tracks, the carriage is always going to go in the same place. So you need to fundamentally change the tracks, and you need to pull out the iron pegs. And that is a difficult and psychologically disturbing process because you have no reference points on how to behave. And that's terrifying. Terrifying. You burn away so much of yourself, which isn't conducive to where you want to go, that you have that feeling of loss. And, for many of you, it might not be the fact that you need to burn away a lot of yourself. I mean, I had to burn away probably 60, 70% of who I was. And, a lot of my friends, when I got out of hospital, didn't recognize me because that person died. That person died. And, maybe there were some salvageable pieces. I think I was a very compassionate person and ambitious, definitely. The ambition stayed, but a lot of the degeneracy had to go. So the reason why many people fail over and over again is because they, to address a bad habit, is because they treat the symptom, not the cause. They change the carriages of the train and not the train track. Another example I'll give is when I was a physiologist and I used to treat people clinically in my rehabilitation center, I had a client that would routinely come to me with a reoccurring ankle sprain. It was always his right ankle. He was always going over on the lateral ligament by the ankle. And in my youth, I would treat the swelling. There's something called RICE, which is rest, ice, compression, and elevation. And that is to deal with the symptoms of that particular injury. But the weakness was the cause. Similarly, when you are trying to change and add habits or remove habits from your life, is a consequence of treating the underlying stories that you were telling yourself fundamentally about who you are. It's more about character. It's more about identity. It's more about how you describe yourselves to other people when nobody's looking, or your friends describe you to other people. That's a really interesting exercise for you to do, is to take a pen and paper and imagine how your closest friends, or maybe even your family members, would describe you to other people. And if you don't like that description, it's a good place to start. It's a sobering place to start. It's a good place to start. So in essence, how does one treat the cause of the present reality? Let's segue down here for just a moment. So this is, there's attention need to be given towards the frequent thoughts that enter our mind, because those reoccurring thoughts typically are the theme in which we describe our lives. And some of you may have this very fatalistic and deterministic way of viewing their lives, that it's fate, nothing within the remit of my control, which I reject. So there's an intimate relationship between thoughts and destiny. We've established this already. Even more potentially pernicious and fleeting thoughts are repeated thoughts which become stories. So these repeated stories becoming the axiom in which we describe and narrate our whole entire lives. And one of the stories that I used to tell myself was that I was a pessimist, that I was here for a good time, not a long time. That was a common phrase I would say to my friends, which is why I justified me smoking weed, smoking cigarettes, doing drugs, and drinking a lot of alcohol back in my university days, and trying to sleep with as many women as I could, no matter the consequences. Was I want to squeeze as much pleasure out of life as possible because I want to die very, very quickly. And that was a story that I would tell myself. And when you tell yourself stories like that, you become very kind of shallow, and you become very, very selfish, and you stop caring about people and stop engaging in conversations that are perhaps deeper and aren't directly connected to the pleasure that you can squeeze out of it in that very moment. And you spend a lot of time by yourself. You spend a lot of time chasing the next hit, chasing the next joint, the next pre-roll for me. And it was part and parcel of that behavior which led me to a very sobering experience that I don't want to be over dramatic, but it nearly killed me. It nearly made me lose my mind. I still have some of the scars that are part and parcel of that experience of me trying to take my own life. But if you know my story, then perhaps I won't go into it too much. But here's the scary thing as well. Stories are based on remembered memories of early experiences in our lives that give us a sense of identity. Now, nothing can replace the experience of the event itself. We only remember the story or the collection of thoughts about the event, which is often inaccurate depending on our biases. So usually, these stories are only the way we are remembered, the memory we have of remembered feelings about that event, which may be typically negative. So more simply put is, you're usually remembering things incorrectly, right? So this idea about me being very nihilistic and pessimist about the world was probably because I had a poor experience with a bad breakup, and that's why I was very cynical and mistrusting of women. The same thing with the divorce of my parents and that breakup, and my mother initiating that made me equally cynical that women are just out to take everything from you, and they see you as purely a means to further their own quality of lives, and they can never truly love you in that regard. And that's really, really harrowing, deep ideas that I invented when I was 13, 14, when our brain hadn't fully formulated. And you remember the pain of going through that particular story, that particular memory. And because feelings have a very permeating effect on your whole psychology, your whole being. They're strong and they're long lasting, and they can formulate your whole identity many, many years after. And that was how I formulated my identity. So, what we have to do is we need to get underneath the CPU into the software, past the hardware. Another story I mentioned here about I could never attract high quality women because I was short. It made me want to spend all of my time inside playing Halo 3 back in the days. I got anxious and nervous about the prospect of being in public places, like even going outside and walking to the gym caused me so much anxiety. I made up stories that people would laugh at me, even if I was near or talking to a woman, because they would perceive me to be reaching out for validation in that way. This made my confidence plummet even further. It's not true. It's not true. And then when I look back on my dating history, as I dated, I would consider, and I'm going to try and be as objective as I can, and I think my classmates at the time would agree with me, is fairly attractive women. I mean, no 9s and 10s. Wasn't dating any it girls at school, but attractive, very compassionate and intelligent and interesting women, despite this idea that often crept up into my mind. If I had made that idea my religion, my North Star, then these things don't happen. So how do you write your own story? This is going to be the practical habit that I think is going to be very, very conducive for you to start to get underneath the hardware and build a identity that is conducive to fundamentally what you want out of this life. Just a quick point here is when you consume, you don't think. So this is difficult to do. It takes some time for you to be present by yourself and stop the input, right? Input in terms of you're inputting right now. If you've got this far and watching this video, you're taking in information. You might be listening to music. You might be watching something else. You might be playing a video game, and you need to have an element of silence, of ceasing the input in order to be really kind of creative. This is fundamentally why people are miserable 90% of the time, because they borrow ideas from consumption, which typically aren't aligned with their morals, values, and virtues. It's more entertaining and gives them a good feeling, and they mistake that from what they really want. And when they have it, it turns to ash in their mouth, and they get depressed and maybe even suicidal. So conscious thought creation is what you fundamentally want to do here. If you haven't watched my video yet on God Mode 2024, this is another fundamental part of nurturing quality of life and something fulfilling beyond the goal, because you're never entitled to the fruits of your work. You're only entitled to the process to get that fruit. That is the real, that is actually finding God and the most fulfilling and satiating thing that you can fundamentally do. I think it's the previous video that I did, and it's very, very valuable, very, very important. And if you can fully integrate that idea into your psyche, you will never ever be lost. But step one, how do we do this logically? Evaluate how you describe yourself. And there were a couple of tools that I mentioned previously about how you can go about this. Ask yourself the question, how do your friends, how do your family describe you to other people? Perhaps if you are meeting a new person and they ask, what do you do for work? Or what do you do on the weekends? Or how would you describe yourself? If you're going to ask yourself, how would you honestly answer that question? What would you say? It can be sobering. Highlight poor storytelling. So, within that particular exercise, highlight the particular points that you don't feel any semblance with, that don't give a long-lasting positive emotion when you say those things. Create positive story concepts. So this idea is about writing a story which is more conducive and congruent with what you would like to say if somebody asked you what you do for work, what you do on the weekends, what are your interests, what are your values, what are your virtues. Do you meditate? Do you have a girlfriend? Do you have a vision for your family? What's your 5-year plan? What's your 10-year plan? Do you like traveling? What's the house you live in? Who are the friends that you have? And the reason I like this exercise so much is because it's fundamentally based in a lot of social events that canon social events, so reoccurring events that typically happen when you meet a new person. These small talk canon questions always happen. What would you really like to be able to say in those kind of contexts? And I think that's such a interesting indicator about how you can start to create a life which is more consistent with your morals, your values, your vision, and your virtues. Now, here's the interesting part: leveraging theta brainwave to start to reprogram your subconscious. So theta brainwave happens when you are just about to go to bed and when you wake up in the morning, and it's basically when your subconscious is more susceptible to new ideas. What I like to do is record myself, maybe affirming some of the bits and pieces that, again, you would like to relay in your positive storytelling about how you describe yourself, things like that, from the perspective that it's already happened. And this is a Neville Goddard idea that you don't attract what you want, you attract what you already feel that you're consistent with, that you already feel you are. And once you do this, you affirm to the universe, you affirm to God, you affirm to the Creator that you are in such a state of gratitude and joy and higher consciousness that it is only up to the universe to orientate itself around your new Taurus field. The Taurus field is basically the energetic aura that you hold when you interact with people, and you can feel this, and the universe feels this. And then reality implementation is start to observe what kind of thoughts that you were having, the words that you're saying, the actions you're having, the character, and fundamentally your destiny. And the way that you would do this is you can start to know if the effects of that subconscious theta brainwave reprogramming is starting to occur in conscious brainwave, so more beta and alpha brainwave, which would be when you're awake, when you're conscious, when you're lucid. If you start having these spontaneous feelings of gratitude, that's a really good indicator that you're onto the correct path. I believe this particular exercise subverts that lost feeling that I had when I came out of that mental health hospital in 2018. I didn't know any of this, and I wish I had these lessons back then. If you want to join a community of individuals who are keeping themselves accountable to their greater vision, link is in the description below for the Patreon and to the VIP Discord. And gentlemen, these are not theories. These are cold, hard facts. I hope you take them, integrate them. This is not entertainment. This is education, and fundamentally going to change the axiom in which you articulate your whole character for the rest of your life. Speak soon.